Welcome to the John McAllister Report, where John McAllister, top football evaluator, interviews college and high school coaches and athletes from around the country. Sit back and enjoy today's podcast.
Hello, today I'd like to welcome you to the John McAllister Report, and we're going to go into my section on Coach's Corner. And although he's retired as a football coach, he was a highly successful head football coach, and he has a great deal with leadership schools down in Dayton area. Jim Place has been a friend of mine for over 30 years. One of the first guys who gave me some credibility when I started this football recruiting evaluation business many, many years ago. He taught. Jim started out as a coaching. He developed a program at Hamilton High School, and now he's retired as a coach, as a football coach, and he works with a program called Social Justice Summit. Social Justice. He works, one meeting they had is called Social Justice Summit, and they also have a huge 7-on-7 football camp this summer in June. And we're going to do this I'm going to do this in two ways. The first is part one. It's going to be more about meeting Jim Place and getting to know Jim Place and getting some of his philosophies. And part two will be talking about Social Justice Summit that they had here a week ago, and also a lot about the 7-on-7 football camp coming up in June. Today, just Jim Place. Well, I'm sure you're going to find him a very sincere, care for kids person. Today is Jim Place, a tremendous coach, now retired. I think he coached 7 different high schools as a head coach. He's been a friend of mine for many years, and I have to tell you first, Coach, when I started this business over 30 years ago, the football business, it took a while to crack people's shell, the old coaches, but you were really receptive to me. I think the first time I met you was at Middletown, I think. And then
John, it absolutely was. I remember this young guy coming around with all kind of vim and vigor, but we shared one thing, John, a tremendous love for Ohio high school football.
Oh my!
Every time I turned around, there was John McAllister. This was way back in the 1980s. The nice thing about Middletown in those days, John, was you shook a tree and a Division I football player fell out of it in Middletown. I mean, we had talent coming out the years, and you helped promote those guys. We had 16 scholarship players in 1 year. A lot of it had to do with you promoting them.
Well, Jim, the other thing I remember, and then we'll get into the business here. The other thing I remember is going to the Bayless Byers football camp the first time. I remember sitting with your daughter, who was probably about 6 or 7 years old. I don't know how old she is now, but she was a little puppy. And the other thing I remember from that camp was all these pro guys working this camp, helping kids. And I got there, I looked up in the stands, and there's Reggie White up there and 2 other guys praying. I'm going, holy mackerel. And to do that in a setting like it was so super. I became a Reggie White fan.
John, we did that for 9 years. That was through the dedication of Keith Byers and Marlon Bayless two Dayton area athletes and went on to play pro. We had 900 young men and some ladies come to that camp every year, and it was free. That was the best part of it. And as you said, we had 30, 35 pros, the top pros. Reggie White, Randall Cunningham, all the top pros, Jim Kelly, that came, and it was based upon character. And of course, Keith and Martin, both men of deep faith, so there was a lot of faith in the camp also. It was really special. And, even to this day, there are some young men that went on to play college, and they said, Coach, I remember going to the Bayless Byers camp, but I remember you coming there, and thanks for remembering my daughter, Carolyn. She now has 3 children of her own as a guidance counselor down in Cincinnati.
She was a puppy.
Yes, she was.
Stands.
Yes.
But anyway, I always talk to you about that every time I see you. Okay, let's talk.
A lot of memories.
Let's talk football first. I don't want to get into it. I know you're from Massillon area, played at Canton Central Catholic, went to University of Dayton. But more important, Jim, I think you coached a lot of different places, and I think it set the stage for them, African-American whites playing on the same team, because there was a lot of intermixture there with those programs.
John. I had such a wonderful career, John. I'm still active today and doing a lot of things, but I actively coached for 48 years, 43 of those as a head coach. And as you said, I got to coach in a lot of different situations. I coached in a rural district, Springfield Northwestern, a suburban district, Beaver Creek. I coached in a parochial school, Chaminade Julian High School, all these as head coach. But there's 18 urban districts in the state of Ohio. I coached in 4 of them. Cincinnati Public, Dayton Public, Middletown, and Hamilton. So I honestly feel like I had a pretty broad spectrum of athletes of every nature, and I enjoyed every stop. Every one of them was special. Every one of them I enjoyed.
And if your wife divorced you tomorrow, you'd probably try to coach again, wouldn't you?
Oh, John, I'd love to go back. Old man time, though, has crept up on me, John. I couldn't handle the heat of 2-a-days.
I know. Let's finish with this. Coaching, you had 245 victories, and you were in the Ohio High School Football Coaches Hall of Fame.
Yeah, those are nice awards, John. Something I'm really proud of. The Ohio High School Football Coaches selected me as the 3rd recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award. And that's special because that means more than just football. As you are, John, I'm a great believer in Ohio High School football. It means a lot to me. And to have them honor me as a Lifetime Achievement Award winner, that's special. And I think it's an award that they should nominate you for at some point.
Oh, no, not me. I got something in Cleveland. I'm in the Cleveland. Chuck Kyle, those guys, I'm in the Cleveland High School Football Hall of Fame up there. I appreciate it.
Well, we should consider you for Miami Valley.
Well, one thing that you and we said earlier, have in common is we both love kids and we love high school football in Ohio. And I think that's
sure.
Huge. I remember, I think you've always said character matters. That's kind of one of the words you live by, isn't it, Jim?
John, I really believe coaching is just an extension of the classroom, that you're hired by a school district and your job, of course, is to coach football, and you want to put a good product as you can on the field every Friday night. But the main reason you're hired is to develop character in those young men or possibly young women that you're working with. And that's the ultimate goal of being a coach. One of the things I say, I wrote a book, John, and the name of the book is, Are You a Character Educator or Are You Just an Educator? And to me, being an educator is one thing, it's an opportunity. You have an opportunity to impact young people in a tremendous way. You can either be just a coach and go out and try and win games and do that, or you can be a character coach, which is really what it's all about, and impact young men's lives for the rest of their lives.
So true. And I'm bragging about myself here, but I just got a Facebook message from a player I didn't coach in high school. I missed him, but I had him as a teacher. I taught him in junior high, and he's special. A coach now, successful. Yeah. I just missed him as far as changing jobs. And he told me in a personal message, he said, I've tried to learn from all the mentors I've had over the years, successful wrestling coach in baseball. And he said, and obviously you were one of those guys. So that meant a lot to me. That's a long time ago, Jim.
You and I both, and both of us as coaches, we hold those moments special. Some people ask me, say, "Well, tell me about the 1992 team." I'll tell you what. I'll tell you about that team when they turn 40. When they turn 40 and I see what they're doing in lives, then I'll tell you whether it was a successful team or not. I don't want to know about the win or loss record. But when they turn 40, they turn 45, they turn 50, what kind of a man they are, that's when I'll tell you whether that team was successful or not.
Okay, let's go to the college instructor character education that I have at the bottom there. But tell me, Jim, I read this. Did it start in Hamilton? Because didn't Hamilton, you started the Winners Club? Where was the Winners Club at?
John, I started Winners Club at Chaminade Julienne High School. It was an anti-drug and alcohol club that students voluntarily joined, and it had tremendous success. There's so much pressure to use drug and alcohol and abuse it in high school. We need to have pressure to not use it and recognize those students and celebrate the fact I'm not using drug and alcohol in high school, and I'm still having a good time. One of the things I really believe, John, talking about the Winners Club, I think that high school is the most greatest time of a person's life. But once you start drinking and doing other drugs, etc., that high school experience has a drastic change. You can't go to a party, you got to go to a party high. You can't go to a game, you got to go to a game high. The people you associate with, they also want to get high all the time and get drunk. It totally changes. It almost ends that wonderful aspect of high school students. So we started Winners Club there, John, and that was very successful. And it led, John, when I was the head football coach at Hamilton, you mentioned that.
That's where I want to go next, Jim.
For 4 years, I held a position. It was a great position. I was assistant superintendent in charge of character development for the 9,800 students in Hamilton City Schools.
In charge of how many students?
There were 9,800 students in 18 schools in Hamilton City Schools, and I was in charge of putting a character program in for the entire district. John, you talk about having fun going to work every day. I couldn't wait to get in my car and go to work because I was doing something that is the dream of an educator. I teach the character education classes, John, and one of the classes I do an exercise and I say, why did you become an educator? Well, 99.9% say because I want to have an impact on young people. And almost all of them say there was some coach or teacher that had a tremendous impact on my life, and I want to have that same impact on other young people. So that's why we went into profession. The problem in education today, though, John, is teachers are pulled away from that. Coaches are pulled away from that. There's so much emphasis on testing. Coaches feel the pressure to win. All these things. Social media has created a monster in itself. We got to get back to the point where educators and coaches got into business to help young people. Well, that's what I got to do for 4 years in Hamilton, and it was a great time. By the time we left, John, we had 120 different character programs. We had won the award as the top character program in the United States of America, and that led to me teaching these classes for the past 15 years.
I want to slow that down a minute. Yeah. One of the top 15 character school educations in the country, in the nation, that you started and built that up to. And so I think both of these things, Coach, have given us a background on, your football, and now you're doing with the social justices and social programs. Now,
absolutely.
That's I would like to talk about that primarily, and I think we'll come back, Coach, with part 2 to this. Because you do have a big 7-on-7 coming up.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that. But
something, my good friend, and John, a great friend of yours, is Bobby Pulsick. Bobby coached at every level: Ohio State, Southern Cal, UCLA. NFL, 4 different jobs in the NFL. But Bobby took me aside one time when I was early in coach. He said, Jim, as a college recruiter, you got to understand something. One of the biggest challenges that we face as a college recruiter is we have to de-recruit athletes. He told me of a story who was the top player. He was in Wisconsin at the time. The top player in Wisconsin, a highly rated 4 or 5 star, I don't know who he was. It took him 2 years to be de-recruited. A, he didn't understand diversity. He didn't like being on a team with people who looked different to them. And B, he still thought he was this mammoth fish in a very small pond, and everybody was there about him. He said he couldn't play until his 3rd year because he had to be de-recruited. And the reason, Bobby also told me this, he said, one of the biggest services you can do your players to help them get recruited is Get them. They don't have to be de-recruited. When they walk onto campus, they understand diversity. They walk onto campus. They understand I'm not the big fish anymore. And most importantly, recruiting's over. The coaches, they're not there to tell you how great you are anymore. That door closed the day you signed. So my point for telling that story about Bobby Polsey and de-recruiting is a huge part of that is you're coming from this background. You're going to this background. You better understand the new background you're going to both on the team and the campus. And they look at that. They say, you know what? This guy's going to be problems. He's not going to fit in and understand the cultural differences. He's going to cause problems. And let me send out a message to all the coaches out there. Coaches, bring your players to this summit. Don't just be a guy that coaches football. Be a character coach. What greater responsibility you can have to get your players to understand and embrace diversity? I said we met all 5 Dayton public schools there. They need to understand what the students out in Valley View and Bellbrook and places like that. People out in Eaton and places like that got to come and understand, hey, these are inner city kids. Remember that 1 hour that I talked about where they sat and talked to each other? Well, we asked them afterwards, what was the main message? To the man, they almost said, we understand that we have more in common than we have different. And we need to get to know each other and focus on what we have in common. And football, high school football, John McAllister, can have a tremendous role in that. And you and I both believe that.
For sure. Tell me about how you got it. How did you build your background? Coach, okay. How did you build your background in character education? You're a character educator. How did you build that background? Tell me this about you personally, Jim, because many people know you throughout I'm sure the country, but in Ohio, definitely Southwest Ohio and Dayton area. But how did it all start for you?
John, that's a great question. I appreciate you asking me that. And I'd like to share this with every coach and with every player out there. John, I was coaching, and I came from a great coaching tree. George Perlis, Wayne Fonts, John McVay, I had Jerry Hanlon. All those are names that John. Went on to tremendous success. Jim Gruden in the college and professional coaching ranks. So I had a great football background. I came from a great football town, great football high school. But John, all of a sudden I was coaching, and I had 3 young children of my own. And one day I sat down and I said, why am I spending all this time working with other people's young children when I've got young children of my own? And I asked myself this question, why are you doing this? And I had asked myself that many, many, many times, but it didn't hit me until I had children of my own. I'm doing this because I want to really and truly have an impact on young people. I want to see young people become better people. I want to bump into them at age 40, 45 and bump into them and say, hey, coach, how you doing? And say, thanks for what you were the part of my life that you were at that time when I needed a little extra guidance, a little extra direction in my life. And all of a sudden, John, I went from being a football coach who cared about character to a character coach. And to me, it's an absolute tremendous difference. And I hope that every coach has that why moment. Now, John, I want to tell you a couple other things along those lines. Way back 30 years ago, when this first happened to me, maybe 35 years ago. See, I'm 75 years old now, John. So it happened when I was 35, 40 years old. I sat down and I made that commitment. But I also started something called a philosophy book, John. It started with 16 pages. And it started out and it said, why am I coaching football? And it went on to every part of the program that affects me and affects the program. Just as simple as that. The very first line in my whole philosophy book is this: God has given me the opportunity to affect young people in a positive way. What I do, what is up to me. Are you? Yeah. So the very first point in my entire philosophy book is this: God has given me a tremendous opportunity to be a football coach. What I do with that is up to me. I can try to win games, or I can try to be the true purpose of what a football coach is, affect young people in a positive way. It's just as simple as that. I'm a great believer in this. Are you a eulogy person or you're a resume person? A resume person is about winning games, building your record, being successful in people's eyes. But a eulogy person is, what are they going to say about you at your funeral? Are they going to stand up and talk about how much money you had, how many games you won? No. I hope they're going to stand up and say, this is what you did to make the world a better place and the people that you affected. Just as simple as that. So that's the very first one. Listen to this, John McAllister. My philosophy book is now 35 years later, is 96 pages. Anytime I hear something, I say, that applies to me, I write it down. I read my philosophy book cover to cover 2 times a year. Wow. Because I really believe this. What do I have to do to pass the pillow test? What's the pillow test? Put my head on the pillow every night and say, was I a good person today? All I got to do is be Jim Place. All I got to do is follow what's in that philosophy book. Now, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. And I look back and I say, I wasn't Jim Place. I wasn't the man that I want to be. That's why I read it. Let's say I might hit a crisis, professionally or personally. I'll sit there and read my philosophy book. And I'll say, just be who you are. Why am I telling you this story, John McAllister? I think every coach should start a philosophy book. Now, let me just say one more thing about that. There's 16 core pages in that. When I was a head football coach, which I was for 44 years, all right, 43 years. The night before 2-a-days, I sat down and we spent 6 hours going through that book with my staff. And I said, this doesn't have anything with offense. There's not a word in there about offense, defense, kicking game. It's how we're going to treat young people. If you don't agree with me, please quit today. Do not go to the first practice tomorrow, because by the end of the year, we're going to look at each other and go, we don't agree. I'll give you an example of that, John. I had a coach one time, and a pretty good coach, but he thought we should cut players. He said, if they're cut them. I've never cut a player. Some players have cut themselves. I said, if your actions do this, then you can't be on the team anymore. But I've never called a young man and said, we don't want you on the team. We don't want you to try out. I've never, as a matter of fact, I drew that line in the sand so many times. Sometimes people said, oh, he's not a strong disciplinarian, because I drew that line in the sand so many times. You know what, John? I'd rather have him say that I cared about kids more than have him say I was a great disciplinarian. Now, we did have discipline, but it was discipline built upon respect. You know, John, a good friend of yours and mine, Leonard Rush from Lima Senior, won a state championship, told me one time he was the head coach of the Lima Senior Spartans. He had a player he cut. The only player, he just called him and said, listen, you're a bad guy. I don't want you on the team because you're a bad guy. At age 24, that young man he cut killed a mom and 3 kids. And Leonard Rush, from that day on, said, what would have happened if I would have drawn a line in the sand one more time? If I would have had a little more patience. That affected me. That lesson from Leonard Rush. So basically, John, I'm a true believer in being a character coach. That's what it's all about. And every year in my life, I think I drifted further away from being a coach and more towards being a character coach. And coaches out there, please take that challenge. Ask your why. Write your philosophy book.
That sounds really good, Jim. I really appreciate you taking the time, your philosophy, and I even know you a little bit better, and I've known you for over 30 years. So that makes me feel good. I will tell you that I'm not leaving it. I'm leaving everybody out except one guy, and he's a good friend of mine, Nate Moore. Nate Moore learned from you, I think, even when you guys cheated in 7-on-7 and stuff. But he learned what it was like to be a good person, good coach. And I think, Coach Place, I'm not putting pressure on anybody, but Nate Moore is almost a clone. I mean, he's really, really good with kids. Probably gets him in trouble, but he's really good with kids.
John, I appreciate that. What a compliment. You know, like we said, how do you know if you're successful? Look 20 years down the road. Yeah. I am so proud of Nate. You know what, John? Every August, I put together an email and I send it to my former assistant coaches and my former players who are now coaching. 54 people last August. 54 of them. You know how proud I am of those 54? Oh, wow. And I send them a message. And the message always deals with being a character coach. As simple as that. What are you doing to be a character coach? I put little anecdotes, little stories, and I send it out to those 54. Nate's at the top of the list. Boy, I have Chip Odden at Coldwater. R.V. Crouch, down at the Hamilton Big Blue. Marcus Colvin out at Baby. I could go on. And I want to stop there because I don't want to leave anybody out. They're all my guys. But boy, when you say Nate's a clone of Jim Place, I can't think of a better compliment. I go up to one Massillon game every year. I stay in touch with Nate. He's doing a great job. And, every time I see those Tigers advance into the regional finals, state finals, I say, that's my guy. That's my Nate. Super. And Chip Otten, too. All of them.
I didn't realize Chip Otten was one of your guys. That's good.
Oh, he's a great, Middletown. We were at the Middies together.
Coach, thank you very much for being on my show and very informative. I've learned a lot. Okay.
You're my friend, John, and thank you for what you've done. Going back to the 1980s, that young guy walked into Middletown High School and said, "I'm John McAllister. I love high school football." I said, "I like this guy."
Well, you helped me. Thanks, Coach. Appreciate it a lot.